Welcome to Academia EduConsult, a subsidiary of academia.com.ng, a one-stop portal where you learn everything you need to know in the area of the English language.
Let us move on in the second part of the video on non-modal auxiliary verbs, where we have been looking at the various forms of the verb do.
Now, when you remember our discussion on the pronouns and on the types of pronouns that we have in English, we talked about the personal pronouns. Now, the first person personal pronoun, either singular or plural, that is the I and the we. The second person personal pronoun, that is the you. The third person plural pronoun, that is they, all go with the verb do. While the third person personal pronoun, that is the singular form only, that is he, she, or it, goes with does. Now, doing and done have to do with the progressive and the perfective aspect respectively. We're going to talk about aspects later on in our lectures. Doing is in the continuous form. It shows that an action is still ongoing, while done has to do with a perfective aspect. It shows that an action has been completed. Now when you look at did has to do with the past tense of do. Is the past tense form of the verb do. We can also use the various forms of the verb do in asking a polar question. When you talk about a polar question is a question that requires a yes or a no answer. Let's go on to see the various forms of the verb have, which is the third type of non-modal auxiliary verb that we have in English. But the verb have exists in the following forms. It exists as have. For instance, they have something to offer. It exists as has. For instance, she has a new car. And it also exists as had, which is the past tense of has and have. For example, we have he had left before the police arrived. Now, when you add the negation, the verb have can also exist as haven't. For example, you can have a sentence like, they haven't got anything to offer. You can have hasn't. For instance, he hasn't done anything significant. You can have the verb hadn't, as you have in sentence, they hadn't seen each other since they separated. Let's look at the various functions of the verb have. This verb have can function as the main verb. Even though here we are treating it as a non-modal auxiliary verb, it can, however, function as the main verb in a sentence. When it does, it indicates possession, individual characteristics, or relationships. Let's see some examples. She has a car. The car has a refrigerator. They have a factory. I have some equipment. We have some cousins in Chicago. The couples have 5 children. She has a pointed nose. The child has crossed eyes. He has anger problems. He has a speech defect. Now, when you look at the verb got, it can also be used with have to show possession, individual characteristics, or relationships. Let's see some sentences to buttress this point. She has got a car. The car has got a refrigerator. They have got a factory. I have got some equipment. We have got some cousins in Chicago. The couples have got 5 children. The child has got crossed eyes. He has got anger problems. He has got a speech defect. Now, let's look at the function of have as an auxiliary verb, as we have in the following sentences. I have submitted the assignment. They have never been to Africa. We have won 2 games. You have been awarded a scholarship. She has lost her wallet. He has been a student for 5 years. It has been a wonderful outing. Now, there is a need to note that have usually goes with the first person singular and plural, that is I and we. It also goes with the second person pronoun, both in the singular and in the plural form, that is you. And then it goes with the third person plural, that is they, while has only goes with the third person singular, that is he, she, or it. Now, the verb have also performs aspectual functions, especially when used with the main verb. It performs this function to show whether an action has been completed or it is still in the process of being completed. Let's see some examples. I have completed my education. The clock has stopped working. They have been waiting for a child a long time. The thief has been terrorizing the inhabitants since last week. The plane had already taken off before we arrived at the airport. He has been traveling around the world for 2 years before he was retired. Now, on a final note, you need to note that the two other non-modal auxiliary verbs, that is the do and the be, exist in the progressive or gerundive forms, but the case of have is peculiar. That is, we can put do and be in the continuous or progressive form, but it is not the same exactly with a have. Some people believe that have can exist in the progressive form as a verb, but this is not grammatical. If you remember our discussion on the types of verbs, we talked about state or stative verbs, which don't usually admit the progressive. Now, have belongs to that category, according to some scholars. So they believe that it must not take the progressive form. It must not be put in the gerundive form, except when you use it as a verbal noun and it is beginning the sentence as a noun. For instance, having you by my side is wonderful. So the case of have is peculiar. Some believe that it can exist in the progressive form as the verb, which we said is not grammatical. Now, and the simple reason is what we have explained, that it belongs to the category of verbs that are referred to as stative or state verbs, verbs that do not admit the progressive forms. And the examples of such verbs include have, see, love, like, believe, resemble. You can see the video on the types of verbs for more information. These verbs simply express a state, what is and what is not. There is no middle ground. Let's see the following examples which are not grammatical. I am having a shower. Now, the correct thing would be I have a shower. She is having a car. That is ungrammatical. The grammatical form will be she has a car. She either has a car or she doesn't have a car. You can't say she is having a car in terms of process. Let's see further examples. I am hearing you. Now, this is common with people a lot when they make phone calls and they keep screaming, I am hearing you. Now, it is very ungrammatical. You can simply say, I can hear you. Let's see more examples. He is liking his new job. There's no middle ground here. It's either he likes the job or he does not like the job. So the correct thing to say would be, he likes his new job. And the last example, I am believing God, like I did say in the discussion on the various types of verbs, that this is common among the Christian circle. You hear them say, I am believing God. Now, this is ungrammatical. You either believe God or you do not believe God. You can't stay in the middle. So the correct thing to say is, I believe God. However, as we used to say, that to every rule there is an exception. These verbs can accommodate the progressive forms only when they exist as verbal nouns. For instance, seeing is believing. So you see seeing coming in the progressive form and believing also coming in the progressive form. It is wrong to say, I am seeing you. Rather, it would be appropriate to say, I can see you. So these verbs can only accommodate or admit the progressive forms only when they exist as verbal nouns. So seeing is believing. Having a shower is refreshing. Having food and clothing, we should be contented. Believing God for grace is commendable. having a platform that teaches English is a welcome development. So take note that the case of have is a peculiar one, unlike the other two non-modal auxiliary verbs, that is do and be. Those ones can readily admit the progressive form, but have has a peculiar case. It cannot admit the progressive form except you use it as a verbal noun. Thank you very much for watching this video. Stay tuned for some other videos.